Alright, so this final quick video, shorter than the others I think, is just going to finish off the A-theory views with the caveat that we're going to be coming back to presentism in more detail next week for a reason that I'll give towards the end of this video. So we're only going to be looking briefly. Really, the question that I want to deal with in this video is to do with the idea of how does presentism deal with the objections that we've already seen. This is Arthur Prior, by the way, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. He's a really brilliant philosopher, and I recommend reading some of his work. Maybe I'll put one of his works in the extra readings, or the suggested extra readings this week. But yeah, he was a presentist and probably the most coherent defender of presentism that there has been. So lots of people still defend presentism. Out of all of the views that we're looking at, the A-theory views at any rate, presentism is the one that is defended by the vast majority of philosophers. So you've got some idea about how things stand in the contemporary literature. I would say, so take the whole field of people working in the philosophy of time as 100% of the people. I would say out of the philosophers who, well, the positions that are defended, I would say it's something like 45% of people defend B-theory, 45% of people defend presentism, that leaves 10%, and I would say like 9% of people defend the growing block view, and 1% of people defend the moving spotlight view. So that should give you some idea about the relative. I mean, that's a bit of a rough estimate on my part. I haven't worked it out or anything properly, but that's a guess. It seems right given the predominance of the papers on this. So presentism is by far the most popular A-theory view. The growing block second, and the moving spotlight the least well defended, or the least defended, not least well, but defended by fewest number of people. And presentism, yeah, is about as popular as B-theory, I would say. But okay, there are plenty of people who defend presentism these days in the contemporary literature, but Arthur Prior was probably the best defender of the view, the most well known at least. And okay, it's also a pure becoming view. So he saw that the growing block view is a pure becoming view. States of affairs come into existence. That's also true on the presentist point of view, except on the presentist point of view, old states of affairs go out of existence at the same time, right? Only the present exists. That's the idea. They're not mad, of course. They do believe that the past used to exist, so they typically will pay attention to tenses, and they will say things like, well, no, dinosaurs used to exist, but that doesn't mean that they do exist. Whereas, you know, we'll come to these issues. These are ontological issues to do with the existence of things. So we're going to look at those in more detail next week. So we're going to pay close attention to this idea of the notion of existence and what it means in these views next week. We'll see. So that's why we're postponing a full treatment of presentism until next week, because there we're going to be focusing in on the notion of existence, and to see how the B-theory eternalists, they're called, the people who think that all times are equally as real, past, present and future, some people think they've got a different understanding of existence than presentists, and that's going to cause some difficulties that we're going to need to try to iron out in order to fully understand the views. But for the time being, we're going to understand this as only the present moment exists, although the past used to exist and the future will exist. It's a pure becoming view, right? It's got similar advantages to the previous two A-theory views. You know, it can explain, at least on the surface, the flow of time. It seems to us that time flows because it really does, and what explains the flow of time is again, the coming into existence of new state of affairs and the going out of existence of the old. That's meant to be an advantage for the view. It also seems it can explain the direction of time. You know, things go out of existence in one way and come into existence in the other, right? You know, it's not that the future states of affairs go out of existence and past state of affairs come into existence, but the opposite way around. In fact, that's what constitutes the past being the past, that they were once real and are no longer not, and the future is the things that will be real and are not yet. It perhaps doesn't explain the fixity of the past and the openness of the future. Neither did the moving spotlight view, but the growing block view there seemed to have an advantage that it can explain why it seemed, or our intuition that the future is open but the past is not. But presentists have got things to say about that. We'll see in future week, next week, or maybe the week after when we do. Anyway, in future weeks. But the big thing that people think is in presentism's favour, as I've mentioned a few times, is that they think that it is the common sense view. And again, we'll deal with that issue next week when we're thinking about ontology and the notion of existence in more detail. But here I want to focus on the idea, how does it fare when we compare it to the growing block view and the moving spotlight view and the objections that we've given so far? Well, it looks as though it can answer the hypertime objection and the rate objections in the same way as the growing block view and the moving spotlight view can answer them. So again, well, maybe I'll draw it in a minute. And there's a question. It looks like it's going to be immune from the epistemic and no explanation objection. So it looks as though presentism has a distinct advantage over the growing block view and the moving spotlight view, in that those objections, specifically the epistemic objection and the no explanation objection, it doesn't look like it's susceptible to them. Okay, so let's go back to my board yet again. Let's get rid of this. Okay, first of all, I mean, if we think about the way the universe changes, the hypertime thing I'll just illustrate. So, you know, we can only draw it as a dot here, but 1900 used to exist, and then it went out of existence, and 1901 came round. It went out of existence in 1902. It went out of, and so on. Again, it looks as though if we want to represent those changes happening, we're going to need something like hypertime again. So again, the A theory, it looks like we're going to need something like a separate dimension of change in which to account for the changing state of the reality as a whole. Similar kind of an idea. Again, I'll be interested to see what you think, whether you think that that is needed or not. But okay, there we go. And if we now consider the problem that we found for, we'll just do it in terms of the growing block, but remember that this also applies to the moving spotlight. The question there was, well, if we look back at Caesar in the back of the block, crossing the Rubicon there, oh dear, I put his head there. There's Caesar. The problem was, well, Caesar thinks that he is present, that time is flowing, except that he is wrong. And we've seen that Peter Forrest has got this answer to this in terms of the causal friction, or the kind of flux, or the zing and the zang that goes on in the at the edge of the block. But I mean, it might be a bit too much to swallow that. It seems a little bit mystical. Well, how does this supposed causal friction take place? Why should we believe that that's so? And anyway, there's going to be further further problems with this, as we'll see next week when we talk about truth makers. So basically, it does cause a problem, these epistemic and no explanation objections. And the thought is, well, 2020, presentism is completely immune to it, right? Because, well, here am I at the edge of the block. I'm thinking I am, well, sorry, I'm not at the edge of the block. I am present. So I'll put it in those terms. I am at the present moment. Well, there's no problems here with Caesar thinking that he's present because, well, Caesar doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Caesar. Caesar is not stuck in the back of the block now in the same state as he was. Caesar has just completely ceased to exist. So Caesar does no longer think anything at all. Very clear. It looks as though, well, as we say, we can know that we're present on the presentist view because it's the only moment that exists, right? How do I know that it's present? Because look, I'm here. I exist. I'm aware of my own existence. The only things that exist are the present moment, so I must be present. So goes the thought. So presentism, it looks like, has got this advantage over the other views, in terms of the objections. Hope that's relatively clear. Now, it may not be, so I put question mark there, immune from the epistemic and no explanation objection. Looks like it is. But there is one argument to consider. So this is Ross Cameron, the guy who I said has recently defended the moving spotlight view, so the 2015 book. Ross Cameron in fact argues that presentism is not immune to the epistemic objection. So I'm just going to give this. I find his line of argument to be not very compelling, really. But he wants to say we can only know that we're in the present moment. It's not that if presentism is true, it's that if we're justified in believing that presentism is true, he says. But, you know, presentism is a metaphysical theory. We ought not to be absolute. We shouldn't feel justified to the extent that's going to give us knowledge. So the best that we can do is to say, well, we think that presentism is true, but perhaps the growing block view is true. And if the growing block view were true, then I wouldn't be able to know that I'm at the edge of the block. So I wouldn't know that I'm present. So even though I do think that presentism is true, because I can't know that presentism is true, I can't know that I'm in the present moment, because it might be that one of the... That's his line of thought. I find it a bit weak. I mean, yeah, I find it a bit weak. It's like, well, yeah, alright, but if we can have very good arguments for presentism and we can establish it as the most plausible view, then we have good justification for believing presentism, and that's going to be enough to give us what we ordinarily think of as being knowledge, I think. So it's a really strange kind of objection. Well, again, I wonder what you think of it. I wonder if it's made sense to you. But anyway, by the way, Ross Cameron thinks there's a reply to the epistemic objection anyway. So remember, he defends the moving spotlight view, and he thinks that he's got a reply to the epistemic objection that we haven't considered yet. And his idea is that it doesn't matter, in fact, whether he wants to adopt a form of knowledge known as externalism about knowledge. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. Again, ask me about it. We can pick it up in the seminar if you want. But his basic idea is to say all that matters is that I am at the present moment. So if I am at the present moment, then my belief that I'm at the present moment corresponds to the fact of the matter. So yes, it might be true that I'm wrong, that I'm at the present moment, but if I am at the present moment, then I can know that I am, and that's all that matters. That's his line of thought. Yeah, I'm not very convinced by any of this, I have to say, but that's what he says, and yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. So that's it. That's all I'm going to talk about this week. I've been focusing on these A-theory views and the objections really to the moving spotlight view and the growing block view, and you know, the historical objections and this really big major objection from the contemporary literature, this idea of the epistemic objection and the related no explanation objection, and seeing how the A-theory views can deal with it. So yeah, that's what we're going to be thinking about and focusing on in the seminar this week. It's an ongoing issue. Some people do think that these objections spell the doom of moving spotlight and growing block view. Other people think it can be defended. And yeah, we'll talk about it. Good. So next week then, we're moving on to specifically ontological matters, the notion of existence, and we're going to be focusing there on B-theory eternalism and presentism, and the opposition between the two. The opposition there is most stark, because the B-theory eternalist thinks past, present and future all exist. Past things, present things and future things all exist. The presentist denies that and thinks that past things and future things do not exist. So we're going to be focusing on those ontological issues and seeing what the views say. So, okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you all in the seminar.